Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everyone had a Freilich Purim. We certainly did in Montana. We are in lesson 9, chapter 3, Perek Gimel of Tanya Kadisha. And in last week's shir in Perek Beis in chapter 2, the Alter Rebbe introduced us to the Nefesh Elokis, the Nefesh Hashenis, the divine soul, which we said is a Chelik Elikami Mal Mamish, literally a piece of God. And that neshama, that nefesh elokis, allows us to think about Hashem and to develop feelings for Hashem. So we have to, if it allows us to think about Hashem and it allows us to have feelings for Hashem, then we have to delve in deeper to the structure of the nefesh elokis. What is the structure of the divine soul, and how does it process information, and how does it generate feelings? Because if we don't know how it processes information, we don't know how it generates feelings, then we aren't able to serve Hashem properly utilizing the Nefesh Elokis. So he says as follows right in the beginning of Perek Gimel, V'hinei kol b'chino madrega mishalish elu nefesh ruach neshama. Every single one of these three facets of the soul, which we already mentioned last week, the nefesh, ruach, and neshama, which nefesh is the body intelligence, and ruach, we said, was emotional intelligence, and neshama is a self-conscious intelligence. So each one of these levels of the neshama, they contain 10 powers. We'll call them 10 powers or 10 spheroids. Here he says he calls them 10 pchinos, which are 10 spheres, 10 powers, and they are a reflection of the 10 heavenly spheros, the divine energies on high, from where they originate. Now, to understand a little bit in Kabbalah, and I mentioned a little bit of this last week, in Kabbalah, Hashem is described as unknowable, right? It's an infinite light, it's an Or Ein Sof, and a little glimmer of that light can reach the universe, can reach us in the universe. Now, as much as the human being is going to use their finite intellect to try to fully understand it, it's not shaykh, it's not possible. Because again, it's infinite. The finite cannot, by definition, a finite brain cannot understand the infinite. But there are little glimmers. Hashem sends us these little glimmers. He transmutes these glimmers into our world to allow us to get an idea, to get a little synopsis, to get a little touch of the divine. Now, these 10 spheres that are the divine manifestations in our world are reflected in every level, and they're called either in the singular sphera or in the plural spheroids. That the term comes from Sefer Yetzirah. And there's no one translation. There's actually a wide range of themes that are used discussing these 10. Sometimes they're called Galgalim, which means heavenly spheres. Sometimes they're called Igulim, which are circles. Sometimes they're called Eiros, which is light. Sometimes they're called Tikkunim or Tachshitim, which is like a beautifying jewelry. Sometimes they're called Livnas HaSapir, which are mystical colors. Sometimes they're called Misparim, which is numbers. Maimaris, which are divine utterances. Or sometimes they're even just called Midos, which are character attributes or emotions. So there are 10 manifestations for every single person's nefesh, ruach, and neshama, which are a reflection of the divine. And now to understand how it structures itself within the Jew, we have to look again to Kabbalah. Very, very interesting. And it's interesting to me personally because I've learned Tanya, I've read Tanya for Chitas, I don't know how many, 25 years, 30 years, I don't know how many years. And then when I was preparing for class, I said, I'm going to give a class to people. I have to know what I'm talking about. So even though I got the point, but when the Alter Rebbe quotes this Kabbalistic term, I wanted to fully understand it, and it blew me away. It was fascinating. The Alter Rebbe says that these 10 spheroids are nechlokos l'shtay, and they're divided into two, shein shalosh imois v'sheva kfulos, which are the 3 mothers and the 7 doubles. Now, normally, people translate that, teachers translate it as the 3 intellectual faculties and the 7 emotional attributes, the 7 emotional faculties. But the language that the Alter Rebbe uses from Kabbalah, from Sefer Yetzirah, is 3 mothers and 7 doubles. What kind of language is that? 7 doubles, what does that mean? And what does 3 mothers mean? So I did a little digging, And it turns out that in Sefer Yetzirah, Kabbalah talks about the Hebrew letters of the Aleph Beis. And we know there's actually a whole book from Rabbi Ari Raskin from Brooklyn Heights. I think it's called Letters of Light. But the power of the divine letters of the Hebrew Aleph Beis, they have each letter in the Hebrew alphabet has an incredible power, divine energy. So there's three mothers, and they are the letters Aleph, Mem, and Shin, not Taf. Aleph, Mem, Shin, representing the beginning, the middle, and towards the end, almost the end of the Aleph Beis. And they represent the inner mind, the inner intellect of the divine manifestations, the divine spheres. And then there's the seven doubles, and this is what really excited me. The seven Hebrew letters of the Aleph Beis that are called doubles are the letters Beis, Gimel, Dalid, Chaf, Pei, Resh, and Taf. And it turns out if you study Sifrei Kabbalah, and I did a little bit of homework on it last week, it's very interesting. These seven letters have a soft pronunciation and a hard pronunciation. So the easy ones, right, are Beis, because we know there's Beis and Veis. Beis is the Dagish, Veis is the Rafa. Beis is the hard pronunciation, and Veis is the soft one. Kaf and Chaf is also easy. Kaf is the hard, and Chaf is the soft. Taf and Saf, also easy. What about, and Pei and Fei is also easy. The three that are fascinating are Gimel, Dalid, and Resh. What is the soft version of a Gimel and the hard? So the only people that actually use it these days are the Yemenites. So there's Gimel and there's Jimel. They do Bore Priya Jafen, right? Actually, according to the tradition that I heard, the Alter Rebbe himself used to pronounce the words like the Yemenites, because that was the authentic way of pronouncing it. So not Gimel as in Ga, but Gimel as in Ja, like a J. Same thing with Dalid. The Yemenites don't pronounce it as a Dalid, like a D. They pronounce it as a TH. 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 We don't have that in our Hebrew, in Ashkenazic, and most of the Sephardic. We don't have a TH, but the Yemenites do. And the same thing with the Resh. There's Resh, like an American Resh, and then there's the Resh, the sort of like a Hispanic Resh, and that's a different pronunciation. So the Kabbalah is saying, Sefer Yetzirah is saying that these seven letters are not God's inner mind, God's inner manifestation, the three inner faculties of the Aleph, Mem, and Shin, which represent the Shalish Imos, the three mothers, but there's Sheva Kvulos, the seven doubles, which are letters that can either be pronounced with a hard or soft pronunciation, which is either Hashem manifesting himself in a soft, chesed, kind, soft form of manifestation, or if it's a hard manifestation, it is a manifestation of Gvura, of a more tough manifestation in the world. So you have 10 spheres divided by either mothers and doubles, or simplistically intellectual versus emotional faculties. And now the Alter Rebbe addresses them in detail. And he says as follows. What are the three mothers? Pirush, Chachma, Bina, Vadas. Chachma, which is wisdom or inquiry. Bina, which is understanding or cognition. And Das, which is knowledge or recognition. So these are the three mothers. Now, I want to point out, I don't want someone to send me an email later and say, Rabbi, I learned somewhere else that in the spheres, the first sphera is not Chachma, but Kesser. The crown of the sphere is the crown. So even the Alter Rebbe himself and many other Sifrei Kabbalah refer to the first of the spheres as Kesser sometimes. But the truth is, as it manifests itself in the Nefesh Elokis, in the godly soul of the Jew, there is no Kesser in the 10 spheres for a good reason. Kesser, as divided into two, Atik and Arich, the higher, the outer crown and the inner crown, represent the faculties or the expressions of desire, pleasure, of pleasure and desire, Tainug and Ratzon. And those are not part of the intellectual and emotional faculties that exist in the manifestation in the Nefesh Elokis. You have that, but it's not part of the 10 spheres as it plays out in the human condition. We do have pleasure, and we do have willpower, desire, but it's not part of the Esser Spheres, and that's why here in Perek Gimel of Tanya, he doesn't refer to the 10, including Kesser, but he actually starts from Chachma, because that is the practical manifestation of it in the human condition in the Nefesh Elokis. It doesn't mean we don't have it, it's just not part of the Esser Spheres, as it comes in the body. So you have the three mothers, which are Chachma, Bina, and Das, three levels of intellectual stimulation or intellectual understanding and cognition. And then you have Shivas Yimei Binyan, you have the 7 days of creation, which refers to the 7 attributes, starting from Chesed all the way to Malchus, starting from the first day, the Sunday of creation, to the Shabbos, to the first Shabbos of creation. Now, the fact that every single person, every single Yid, every single Jew can have a Nefesh Elokis with these 10 manifestations tells you already how unique a Jewish person is. Why? Because a malach, an angel, as holy as they may be, they come from a world known in Kabbalah as Olam HaTohu, the world of chaos. They don't come from a world of tikkun, a world of rectification, a world of structure. Therefore, they cannot interconnect their faculties. When the faculty, they could either be a malach of Sar Shel Eish or Sar Shel Mayim. I represent water, I represent fire, and they clash, and it creates great destruction. It's not what we can handle. But a Yid has the ability to have all different types of character traits, all different types of midas. You could have a little fire, a little water. They can work with each other, because we're not from Olam HaTohu, we're from Olam HaTikkun, we're from the world of rectification, and to rectify anything, you need to be able to be interconnected with others, and that's how it plays out in our Nefesh Elokis, and how we deal with the world that we're in. Says the Alter Rebbe, V'kach b'nefesh ha'adam shenechlekes l'shtayim. Same thing in the, just like in the 10 spheres l'mayla. In the person's soul, they're divided into two, which are seichel and midos, intellect and emotions, which intellect is really within yourself, and midos, the emotional attributes, is how you relate to others. And then he goes on to explain. He says, "Aseichel, koil chachma bino das." Human intellect, just like the divine spheroids, has chachma, bina, and das, which I mentioned earlier is either wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, or inquiry, cognition, and recognition. Va'amidos and the emotions, which are love of God, trepidation and reverence of Hashem, venerating Hashem, etc. So, generally, as a rule, you only want something after you understand why it's good. A sane person doesn't want something if they're not sure it's good for them. Same thing with fear, with reverence or trepidation. You only fear something after you understand that it's a danger, right? Little children are not scared of the same things that adults are scared of, because they don't know that it's a danger. It's only adults that read and learn the hard way that we suddenly become all freaked out about things. So the natural order of things is that the mothers give birth to the emotions, the mothers, the intellect, because once you know it, now you can have a feeling towards it, no matter what that feeling may be. Generally, as a rule, your feeling should be an outcome of what you think or what you've thought about. And by the way, even people that are shaitim, Chassidus says this, even someone who's an idiot, their idiotic emotions are based on some knowledge. It may be off, it may be a misunderstanding, but it's based on a piece of knowledge that someone gave them or that they heard. It may not be true, it may not be right, but their feelings, their emotions are dictated by various pieces of information, maybe not deep information, but pieces of knowledge that came to them. Says the Alter Rebbe, now that he mentioned all that they're divided into emotional and intellectual, he's going to get a little deeper. He says, "V'chachma bina v'das nikru imois u'makar lemidas." Chachma and bina and das, the intellectual ones are called mothers, and they are the source of the emotions. Ki amidas until this chachma bina v'das, because emotions are the children of the intellect. So basically, what the Alter Rebbe is saying is that if you think about Hashem long enough, you'll come to feel and experience Him. And that's why this concept of hisboinenus, the idea of meditation, right, which we're going to learn about later, is something very, very real. In other words, Dr. Rebbe is telling us that someone says, I don't really feel God. That's because you never spent time meditating on God. Actually, there's a letter that the Alter Rebbe wrote in 1805 to a particular community, and he wrote, and here's the translation. He said, in order for there to be reverence of God, there must be deep contemplation and meditation. Everyone in the regions of Volyn, which is the area that the Alter Rebbe was in, and the Ukraine, who have never had a whiff of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov and his disciples, knows the explanation of the Holy Zohar's teachings. That Bina is the mother of the children. Eim Habonim, like we say in Hallel, Eim Habonim Semecha. The Eim Habonim, the mother of the children, is Bina. The children are love and reverence of God. They are born through meditation and deep contemplation on the greatness of God. Each person according to his ability. And listen to these words. Just as it's impossible to give birth to a child without a mother, so too it's impossible to revere God without meditative work. And here you see a key difference between many other Hasidism and any other forms of Orthodox spiritual service of Hashem. The Alter Rebbe is making it clear that for a Chassid, for someone that wants to serve God based on Chassidus Chabad, it's impossible to reach a level of Yiras Shamayim, of Yiras Hashem and Avas Hashem, if you're not going to spend the time meditating on the greatness of Hashem intellectually, so that the intellect will give birth to the proper healthy midos that the person needs to have in the service of Hashem. And how exactly does it work? So the Alter Rebbe is now going to explain what Chachma and Bina represent, and he starts with Chachma. He says as follows: Abira Inyan, let's explore this idea. So there's the Nefesh Elokis has Chachma. It has rationality, it has the ability to comprehend, which is its power to understand all things. This level of comprehension is called Nikra B'Shem Chachma Koyach Ma. The word Chachma comes from two Hebrew words, Koyach Ma, which means, based on the Zohar, the Koyach, the power of Ma, the ability to look at something and say, what is this? In other words, Chachma is a moment of intellectual breakthrough. You're discovering something. You don't have it fully fleshed out. You haven't gone through all the details yet. It hasn't gone through the process of Bina, which we're going to talk about in a moment. It's a moment of Ma. It also represents Bittul. Like, I don't know exactly what this is, but there's something here that's just a spark, a lightning bolt of wisdom that just came through. I feel it in my bones. I understand it in my head, but now I need to get to its details. So, the koyach, Hebrew for koyach, can mean either power or potential. The koyach ma is you have this piece of intellectual information, but it's still at a potential level. You haven't yet delineated all its details and figured out exactly how it's going to play out. But every Yidin is Nefesh Elokis. When they're sitting at a mountaintop in Montana, or they're sitting at Niagara Falls, or sometimes even if you're sitting in a shul with good views, and you have a moment of intellectual stimulation and meditation of the greatness of Hashem. Maybe you're saying Baruch Nafshi on Rosh Chodesh, and you're thinking about the incredible, in a meditative state, in His Hisbonenus, you're thinking about the incredible reality of what Hashem provides us. It's that initial moment where you go, aha, there's something here, I get it. What does Bina do? When you take the chachma, the potential, and you bring it to fruition. What does it mean to fruition? Through meditating in your mind to clarify an idea in its full richness and depth. Beginning with the raw chachma concept found in your mind, that is called nikra bina, that is called cognition bina. And as explained in other places in Chassidus, when it says the length and the breadth of what Bina does, it says Shlomo HaMelech had 3,000 masholim, 3,000 parables to understand each idea. Right? So part of Bina, of fleshing out the Chachma, of delineating the details and truly grasping intellectually, you go through layers and layers and layers of more and more understanding. Right? And then you go even deeper. If it's an Inyan in Torah, if it's a concept in Torah, you make the connection between Ilchas Momenes and Ilchas Treifas, the laws of financial stuff and the laws of kosher animals. You're making deep, deep correlations and ideas, and these are all part of the length and depth and breadth of Bina. In other words, when you look at the world, the void, of meditation, you see a world devoid of God. But when you spend time thinking about it, suddenly like, wow, there's this great moment where you suddenly experience and comprehend the divine presence. And if you do that well enough, says the Alter Rebbe here, Ve'hein Hein av v'aim hamilidas avas Hashem v'yirasa yifachli. These mental processes of chachma and bina are the father and mother. So now he goes from calling all three intellectual faculties mothers. Now he's dividing up. Now we have a couple. Chachma is the father, bina is the mother, and they're giving birth, which give birth to love of Hashem as well as to the reverence and trepidation of Hashem. Now, when going back to what I said earlier, when the Mekubalim and the Alter Rebbe and others quote Kesser as being one of the spheres, Chachma and Bina become one. Because the truth is, for most people, if you don't spend the time to divide them up, who spends time to separate between the moment you have the intellectual idea to 3 seconds later when you start delineating all the details? I got an idea, this is the idea. Actually, in Kabbalah and the Zohar, it's called Trei Rei and Deloy Misparshim. Two beloved, best friends that are never disconnected. That's Chachma and Bina. But the Alter Rebbe here specifically wanted us to know that there's a difference, that there's a mother and there's a father, because each one plays their unique role. In some places in Chassidus, it refers to Chachma and Bina as the difference between Shmiya and Re'iyah, the vision and hearing something. When you see something, it's like Chachma. It's that you can never take it away. It's that initial spark. You saw it, you cannot unsee it. You hear something, okay, that's Bina. Now you get, what, did he mean this? Did he mean that? Right? That's why it says that there's Lamed Beis Nesiva is Chachma. There's 32 paths of Chachma. What? 32 paths of what? Leiv. Lamed Beis is the word Leiv, which represents emotions, the heart. If you want to get to an emotional relationship with Hashem, there's 32 paths from Chachma into Bina, taking the ideas, the Barak HaMavrik, the lightning bolt of wisdom, the lightning bolt of inquiry that you had, turning it into a cognition or an understanding of godliness, which eventually will lead to Leiv, to the heart, to the emotional relationship with Hashem. But the idea that you can have some emotional, ecstatic ecstasy of spirituality, it could be, it's true, I'm not judging, but Chassidus Chabad, it's not. Chassidus Chabad is about meditating with his boinanus on the incredible greatness of Hashem, both in Torah and in nature and every other part of life, and allowing that to create emotions. And now he continues in 3 levels of what that meditative state is. What are you thinking about? So I'm in Montana, so I have my own opinion. You just go outside and look in the mountains and sit by the river, and there you go. You see Hashem. But the Alter Rebbe gives us more specificity. He says as follows. Because when the cognitive powers of your rational soul, when it focuses deeply on the greatness of God, what are you focusing? Which part of the greatness of God? So he says 3 things. 3 things. Number 1, that every part of creation is saturated, that Hashem fills all the worlds with his presence. Number 2, Soiviv Kolalmin, that Hashem, that Hashem's existence engulfs, all of existence is engulfed in Hashem as he transcends all the worlds. Soiviv Kolalmin. And number 3, which is the hardest of them all perhaps, Kula Kamei Kolei Choshev, that all of existence in the presence of Hashem is considered as nothing. You start thinking about that, oh my God, not just is nature beautiful, but that Hashem fills every facet of creation, and he transcends all of existence. And that everything is really naught in his eyes, because God is the same before and after he created the world, didn't affect him. You go, oh my God, it's really not comprehensible. And that's the beauty of it. That's why it inspires us. And says when you start thinking, and not only thinking, but meditating, this is what's going to happen, says the Alter Rebbe. As a result of your contemplation, a sense of Yiras Hashem, reverence of Hashem's majesty Yiras haroimus, I'm going to explain in a minute what that means, will be born in your thinking mind, which means you're going to revere God and to feel shame in the presence of His blessed greatness, which is without end or limit. Furthermore, ufachad Hashem beliboy. You're going to have an intellectual experience where in your head you're going to recognize the reverence of Hashem, but then it's going to turn to pachad Hashem beliboy. It's going to turn into trepidation for Hashem in your heart. What is Yiras HaRoimamus? Which he translated as reverence of Hashem's majesty, because there's different types of Yira, there's different types of fear or trepidation. There are those who have Yiras HaEinish, they're scared of being punished by Hashem. When you're scared of being punished, it doesn't make you feel close to God. It makes you want to run away from Him because He's going to punish you. You never met anyone in your life who you were scared was going to punish you that you felt all fuzzy and close to. I never met anyone that's being pulled over by a cop and he's like all fuzzy and warm and excited to have this relationship now. There's yira, there's reverence, there's trepidation, but it's yiras ha'einish. I don't want to get punished. It's like someone standing in front of a judge. You don't feel close to the judge. You stand in trepidation, yiras ha'einish, I'm going to get punished. Actually, the Mizritcher Maggid says that these people, when you fear the punishment of the king, it's no different than fearing a grizzly bear attacking you. The Mizritcher Maggid says, in other words, it's a natural tendency to be fearful of something that can hurt you. So if Hashem is the entity that's going to punish you, that's not a closeness. What the Rebbe is talking about here is a meditative contemplation that brings you to Yiras HaRoimamus, that you're in awe, in reverence of Hashem. You want to keep a distance because you're shamed, because God is so reverent, and you feel such reverence towards Him that you're just ashamed to show up in your shmatas. You're ashamed to show up in your overalls, your spiritual overalls. But it's not because you're scared of Him, it's because you recognize how amazing He is, and you feel like you should be doing better because you're in awe of Him. He's taking care of everything you need. You're not scared of Him like a grizzly bear. And that creates, through the proper contemplation, proper yira and ava. And then he says, Vishuv Yislaiv Liboy Ba'ava Az B'Kirish Ve'esh, and after that your heart will be ignited with a rapturous love like a flaming fire. Then he uses three terms here. V'chasheka v'chafetzo truka. A flame with fervor and desire and longing. The Nefesh and a craving soul of Baruch Hu. You just want more and more of Him. When you suddenly feel that closeness to Hashem, that Yiras HaRoimamus, it creates also a love. And the love makes you want more and more and more of it. Deveka is a term where you do things because you're connected. You want to remain connected, but it's not emotional. It's not inspirational. Chasheka is inspirational, but it's not a longing. But then there's chafetza. Chafetza is this deep, deep yearning that you just want, you got enough and you want more. That's what happens to a yid when you have the proper hisbonenus. Famous words from the Shpola Zayda, the great Shpola Zayda. He said, he once told the Eibishter, he said, if you would have taken all the taivas of the world, all the temptations, and put it into the Reishas Chachma, and all the words about Gehenna and hell and purgatory, you would have put that into front of us, then we would have been safe and not do any sins. But you took all the words about purgatory and you put it into the Reishas Chachma, and you put all the temptations in front of us. How do you expect us to turn out and make the right decisions? So it's not going to happen naturally, because the world naturally is schlepping us to the Nefesh Abamis. But if you want to manifest, if you want to live, and you want to experience your Nefesh Elokis, your godly soul, it's going to take hisbonenus. No distractions, no interruptions, no phones. You need to be able to go into a meditative state to think about the godless of Hashem. That will create Yiras HaRoimamus, a reverent fear and trepidation of Hashem, and that will bring to incredible love. What is this called? Says the Alter Rebbe, the Klois HaNefesh. This love is the languishing of the soul which we find in various places in Torah, K'dechsiv, in Tehillim, it says, Nichsefa v'gam kolsa nafshi. David HaMelech says, my soul yearns, indeed it languishes. Tzama nafshi lalikim. My soul thirsts for God, or tzama l'cha nafshi. Right, the Rebbe, the famous, it's in Tanya, but the Rebbe, the tzama l'cha nafshi, you can hear when the Rebbe sings it, you can almost hear the soul languishing. The soul is thirsty for the Eibishter. How does that happen? How does a Jew become thirsty for the Eibishter? I'm thirsty for seltzer and I'm hungry for sushi. How do you become languishing, that you're yearning for God? That happens through meditation. Rabbeinu Bachya and Kuda, by the way, in Chayvas Alavavas, in Duties of the Heart, he talks about Klois HaNefesh. He talks about this state where when the light of Hashem penetrates your neshama and it brings out this incredible yearning, Klois HaNefesh, that you want. Batzimoyen, this thirsting that you have, that comes about through meditation, it comes from the elemental fire that's in your Nefesh Elokis. As the natural scientists write, and it's also written in Kabbalah and Eitz Chaim, that the element of fire is in the heart, and whereas the element of water and moisture is rooted in the brain. Is stated in Eitz Chaim, section 50, that Chachma is the elemental water of the divine soul. In other words, there's the water of your divine service and there's the fire. It starts with water. It starts with intellectual. Study Chassidus. Allow yourself to understand a little bit of godliness, and most of what you understand is that you don't understand, but you're understanding that at least you don't understand, and that it's so infinite and so incredible. And if you meditate on it and contemplate on it, it will create naturally midas, and then the fire, the element of fire within your Nefesh Elokis comes to life. And by the way, once you have that, what about all the other? We only spoke about Ava and Yira, which is Kesser and Gvura. What about the other midas? Says the Alter Rebbe, Bushara midas, Kulam im Ante Ayira v'Ava Tosem. All the other emotions are branches and derivatives of reverence and fear, which is one, and love, as explained elsewhere. So all your midas, the ones you need to focus on most, is Ava and Yira, love of God and fear/reverence of God. And that comes through meditation. Once you have those two, Tiferes, Hoid, Yesoid, which we're going to talk about later in Tanya, those are all derivatives, they're all offshoots, they're all branches of the two main midos, the two main attributes, which are Ava and Yira, Chesed and Gvura. Now that we explained that, we have to do one more thing before we wrap up for tonight, which is how he finishes. We actually are going to finish the entire Perek Gimel tonight. Perek Gimel is a shorter Perek, and that is, we didn't touch on Daas. What is this third thing, this third intellectual faculty called Daas? Now, sometimes Daas is Nimna, sometimes it's not Nimna. Sometimes it is counted in the spheres, sometimes it's not. When Kesser is counted, Daas is not counted. When Daas is counted, Kesser is not counted. What is Daas? We said Chachma is the inquiry, the initial wisdom, the initial idea, and Bina is the extrapolation and the delineating of the idea, the details of the idea. What's Das? And what happens if you don't have Das? Says the Alter Rebbe, and here, I'm sorry to break it to everyone. Actually, I'm not so sorry, but Das is the key. If you don't have Das, what's the famous lashon in the Gemara? Im ein Das avdala minayin. If you don't have Das, you don't have right? There's the whole discussion about the bracha chayin and Das and Shemon Esrei. Im ein Das. If you don't have intellect, how are you going to know how to differentiate things? How are you going to differentiate the Shabbos and the weekday if you don't have Das? You need chayin. Ata chayin and ladam Das. I know in a world where there's so much idiocy, you sometimes worry, you sometimes wonder if Hashem's giving the Das to everyone appropriately, but there's Ata chayin and ladam Das. What is Das? You need to have Das. What? He says like this. V'adas humiloshin v'adam yadas chava. In the Torah and Bereshis it says Adam knew Chava. Adam knew Eve. What does that mean? It means he had a union with her. He had a sexual relation with her. The ultimate oneness. Him and his wife, husband and wife. So knowledge, it says he knew her. What does knowledge mean? Loshen iskashrus v'ischabrus. So it means bonding and joining. Das means bonding and joining. What does that mean intellectually, in the realm of intellect and comprehension? Shemekasher daite bekesher amitz v'chazek ma'oid. That just like physical bonding, das is a process. You focus your mind very firm and strong. V'yiska machshavtei b'choyze b'dulzin zibaruchu. You have an intense fixation of thought. You're fixated on the thought, on the greatness of the blessed infinite light, the Iron Sof. The Einei Messiach daite without losing concentration. You can have a great idea and you can figure out all the details. If you aren't able to intellectually become one with the idea, where you're focused and fixated on it, you're not getting new information. Das is nothing new. You already had that in Chochmah and Bina. It's nothing new that wasn't fathomed already in Chochmah and Bina. It just fosters an attachment with the idea, making it real and relevant to you intellectually. And here he says, because even if you appreciate the greatness of the blessed infinite light with your Chachma and Bina, he namely, unless you bond your Das, focusing your mind with intensity and consistency, you will not produce genuine love and reverence in your soul. Hot words, listen to me, but only worthless delusions. If you don't have Das, you might think you love God. You might feel like your imagination that you have reverence for Hashem. You might even get emotionally all ecstatic about it. It's passing. It's going to go away. It'll blow away with the wind. It will not have consistency. It will not have stability. It will not stay with you. And this is, by the way, one of the biggest complaints people have in their service of Hashem. And as a shliach, as a rabbi, as a friend, I can tell you, it is a big challenge. People struggle with it. I had the inspiration yesterday, but I don't have it anymore. Or I had it for a month. It was great. I was booming. I davened every day on fire. And now I feel totally checked out. Chances are high that the reason that happened, it's not the only reason, but a very good chance, is that it wasn't real. It didn't come through a real process of meditation, a real process of hisbonenus, a real process of intellectually contemplating memali kalam, soiva kalam, that kulei kamei kalei choshev, a deep recognition of the incredible greatness of Hashem and the smallness of a human, and all the other meditations that Dr. Rebbe is going to discuss in Tanya. So if you really want to have substantive emotional bond with Hashem, substantive ava and yira, love and reverence, it has to have das. Because it ain't das avdala minayin, there's no way you're going to have the ability to keep it going. Das kiyum amidas v'chayus, and therefore das ensures the sustainability of the emotions and their energy. And all of the emotions depend on das. It incorporates chesed and gvura, love, pirush, ava, vanafev, yirafeh, love and its derivatives, and reverence and its derivatives, as we're going to discuss later in Tanya primarily. This idea is going to be discussed later in Perek Tezayin, chapter 16, and then even more in Perek Mem Beis, chapter 42. So we got many, many months before we get there. But that is how we wrapped up chapter 3. And it's so important because you hear today so often, both within the Jewish community, in the religious Jewish community, in the non-religious Jewish community, oh my gosh, Rabbi, you have no idea. I found this great meditation online on YouTube. It's from a Buddhist monk in God knows where, or it's from Zen this and Zen that. Habibi, we don't need Buddhism. We don't need Zoroastrianism. We don't need any of this stuff. Perek Gimel, chapter 3 of Tanya. And it's not the Alter Rebbe inventing it. It's based on the Zohar. It's based on Torah. It's based on some of the Chamnafshi. The David HaMelech is already talking about. He needs a yearning for Hashem, and that only happens when you have the intellectual meditative state. So, what's the practical advice? Is that every one of us should find 5 minutes a day, maybe 5 minutes a week. If you're doing already 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, to find time to include meditation. Divine, not the meditation from the Goyim, that you should think about nothing. Remove all things from your brain. I had a guy in Bozeman who used to hack me a whole day. Clear your mind of all thoughts. That's not meditation. I don't know what it is, but it ain't us. The meditation for a Jew is to fill your mind with a recognition both in Chachma and Bina, and of course Das, inquiry, cognition and recognition of the godless of Hashem, with a Yiras Haremus that will bring us to the Ava Kirish Pe'esh, the fiery flame love of Hashem, with a yearning and a languishing for godliness. and your life will change for the better forever. Sei gesund, a guten Erev Shabbos, and we will see you back here next week. I'm gonna stop the recording, and anyone that has questions, if you want to open your mics, I will give you the ability to do that. A freilich and Shabbos, sei gesund.